Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Rachel Helgroth, the Director of Flute Sales for Schmidt Music, and today I want to talk about starting a beginner on flute. Today we're going to gear this more toward the instructor side of things, just so we can talk about some basic tips to keep in mind as you're starting a beginner on flute for the very first time. So if we're talking about just getting the very first sound, what I typically recommend is you've got the student with you and you have them use their finger to mimic the head joint, and you have them find a place below their lip, kind of in that little crevice that we have on the chin. Just have them rest their finger there and say, ooh, ooh, and just keep that shape in mind. Now, with that ooh shape, we're just going to blow air through that without the voice engaged. So ooh. And that's going to be a really simple way to get the very first sound to come across on the head joint. So I'll grab my head joint now and show you what that would translate to. Now, as you're helping a beginner, if it's virtually because we're not able to do face-to-face instruction, or you are able to be in the same space, make sure that if they're doing it themselves, they're covering the end of the head joint tube. If you're there with them, I recommend that you do this part for them, the actual placement of the head joint. So we're just going to try to find that same spot, kind of resting that so we can just feel the edge of the embouchure hole hitting the edge of our lip, kind of where that fleshy part of the lip meets the actual flesh of the chin. And we want to just kind of center it there and then try blowing through that ooh shape again. And that should be a really easy first sound. Now, some students may get the higher sound right away, and that's okay. We want them to have that flexibility. So I always encourage students, if they get that high sound first, to try to make it lower just by thinking of a bulldog face, so really dropping everything down low like this. Otherwise, if they get the low sound, encourage them to try to make a higher sound by blowing faster air, as though they're kind of like thinking about throwing a paper airplane, just that kind of air. So again, high and low sounds. And then they can do exercises on the head joint as well. Now, these exercises are actually outlined pretty well in one of my favorite beginning books called Flute 101, Mastering the Basics. So it takes you through basic setup of the instrument, but it also offers these head joint exercises, which I think are sometimes overlooked. Most of the sound on flute comes from the head joint, so we really want to make sure that students get a great response right away. So we can do hot cross buns just using the head joint and inserting the finger into the head joint tube here. And that's a really fun exercise for young students as well. They can, of course, do the slide whistle. So experimenting with different things, again, with the head joint, really important. Once you feel that they've got a grasp and an understanding of how to get that first sound pretty consistently, then I recommend talking the student through the setup of the flute. So that's what we're going to do next. Now, this is going to be a personal preference of which order you like to do first, but I tend to prefer to put the head joint on as the last step. So I'll start with the body and the foot, and I think it's important to outline those different pieces to the student as well. So make sure they understand that the flute is like our own body. It's got a head, a body, and then a foot at the end. So I think that's a really cool way to remember. All right, so I start with the body then, and I like to hold in my left hand the barrel here. So usually this will be the part that has some kind of logo on it. So I'll hold there just because we don't want to crush any of the keys or the rods. It's pretty easy to get those out of adjustment if we hold on too tightly. And then I'll take the foot joint, and here I'm going to grab the very end of the foot joint as well. Again, for the same reasons, we just don't want to risk putting anything out of alignment by putting pressure on those delicate areas of the instrument. Now, what I always recommend is we make sure that everything is lining up straight on. Sometimes you'll see people are trying to put it on at an angle like this or this, but that's really easy to crush this tenon here, which is a very delicate part, and then the flute won't fit securely together. So again, make sure it's lined up pretty straight, and then we're not just pushing straight on, we're going to actually turn it kind of away and then back toward you. And what I always recommend is we have this rod here on the foot joint centered through the middle of this key where the right hand ring finger goes. That will give us, in general, the right placement for most hands, although we may need to adjust from person to person, again, because we're all shaped slightly differently, and especially for beginners, they have slightly smaller hands. So once we have the body and the foot together, I actually switch hands, and I hold on to the body, again, on that barrel with my right hand, and I get my head joint with the left hand. So in the left hand, we've got that tuning slide here, that slightly discolored portion or differently colored portion of the head joint, and that's what we're going to put into the barrel. So again, making sure that that is a straight connection here, and it's not being pushed in at any awkward angles. And then I use a slight twisting motion to push that into the body. As I'm doing that, I'm making sure that I don't push in all the way. Again, you probably don't need to be pushed in all the way to be in tune, since most flutes are pitched at A442. So this will be a little bit better for that pitch awareness right away. And then as far as alignment here, I'm trying to center the embouchure hole on the C key. So that first key where the left hand index finger goes. That's going to be, in general, a really great position for those students to have that head joint so that they can get the balance and response that they need. All right, so that's the flute assembly, but then we come to some of the more important parts of the actual process here. So probably one of the most common issues I see with young beginners is they don't know how to balance the instrument properly, and that can just wreak havoc on their development as musicians. It's really difficult for a student to move their fingers quickly if things aren't balanced properly between the hands. So I think let's start with putting fingers on the instrument and then talk about how that balance works. So I always start with the right hand because I think it's a little bit easier. If you just point out where the pinky goes on that very end, that D sharp key on the foot, and then work one finger up at a time, and then go ahead and put that other finger, that thumb, underneath in a spot that it balances. This position will vary from player to player, but in general, somewhere around this first key and the first trill key tends to be a good basic position to have. Left hand, then, I always start with the thumb, and I just tell students to put that on the largest key on the back, and I have them come around to the front and then skip that key. Middle finger goes here, ring finger here, and then your pinky would operate this key. And then usually pretty naturally a student will rest the flute on that left hand index finger, on that like fleshy, squishy part of the finger, and that's where we want it to be. If they're not, then we can talk about it in the next step, which is balance points. So as we're balancing the flute, there are 3 points that are always in contact with the instrument, and this is how we balance things. So the embouchure is going to be 1, right? We're always in contact here with the lip plate. Then we've got that left hand index finger and the right hand thumb. And in general, the right hand thumb is going to push into that left hand point to create a balance where you can actually balance the whole instrument with just those 3 points and no other fingers touching the keys. This will eventually allow us to move as quickly as we need to through those really fast passages that happen pretty early in a flutist's career. So my students love doing this. I call this butterfly wings because it kind of sounds like the murmurations of a butterfly, but just moving as lightly as you can over those keys there. Now, the other part of this alignment is that we want to make sure the student has the right angle here with the flute floating away from their body. So sometimes we tend to think of flute as being just a 2-dimensional instrument, right? Where we're thinking of everything being parallel to the shoulders and having that same line. But what we really need to make sure of is that we have an angle here. So the right arm actually floats forward and away from the body, and the left arm does the same. So they're working together as a unit, and you can just experiment with that, pushing away and back. So we generally think about having about a 45-degree angle between the shoulders and this open angle of the flute itself. That tends to give us a more open, resonant sound versus being stuck back here, and it's also going to help with some of those tension issues that sometimes creep into flute playing. So after we've established those points, I think it's really fun if you can just have the student balance the flute and try to play. So again, remembering that ooh sound, or that ooh shape rather, and then blowing air through that shape. And once they get that consistently, then they're ready to move on to some fingering exercises. Now, balancing the flute can be pretty tricky at first, so if they need to, just have them hold on to the barrel and the end of the flute and just play notes like that. But we want them to be able to blow through the whole tube and experience that airflow as soon as possible, because it is a little bit different than just the head joint by itself. So we've got those balance points established, we've got our angle established, then we're going to start playing notes. And I always recommend starting on a B natural and working down one finger at a time, just because it does tend to be a little bit easier for beginners. So starting with the B, you've got that thumb and the first finger, and then the right hand pinky. And making sure that they're not using that pinky to hold onto the flute, that they're balancing and pushing with that right hand thumb into the left, and we're balancing that way. And then adding the A, so adding that middle finger. And then finally that G. So then they can put all of those together. And there are so many songs that you can play with just those 3 notes alone. So those are the first 3 notes that are introduced in Flute 101. And I think it's really advantageous for students to start here. Too often our standard method books actually take us through B flat to C right away, and that's a really hard combination because you're taking almost all of the fingers off the instrument and having to rebalance before you really know what the instrument is all about. So keeping it low to start that B, A, G tends to be really beneficial for students to just get used to the instrument before any of those other complications are introduced. So I hope you found this helpful and informative. If you have questions about any of this, I'm happy to help you with this. Just reach out to me or any of our team here at the Flute Gallery, and we can do our best to help you through these more challenging times with virtual teaching. If you have any other suggestions or ideas that you'd like to see, please let us know. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.